Hello, welcome to BEH 221, Resolution-Based Counseling Skills. Today we're going to talk about empathic confrontation. So, when we say the words empathic and confrontation, they may seem opposite. They may seem antithetical. However, part of the job of a counselor or therapist is to help clients face the challenges that are basic to them recreating their story or rewriting their story. Empathic confrontation clarifies the conflict, bringing out internal and external discrepancies. It promotes change as well as activating resilience and creativity. Most clients come to an interview experiencing ambivalence, feeling conflicted about issues, seeking some form of resolution. They feel like they've painted themselves into a corner and they just don't know how to solve their own issues. Some may resist your efforts to bring about the very transformation they seek because, if you're dealing with a lifelong problem or even a recent problem and the fix is going to be hard. It's going to be a challenge. A lot of times people would rather complain than actually do anything about that challenge. What we then see is this issue of having a client who wants to change but isn't willing to do the work. So when we are listening and are emphatic, confrontation will help clients move beyond their issues and minimize resistance. Effective empathic confrontation of conflict and incongruity leads clients to create new ways of thinking and increased intentionality. So if you have someone who is just basically unwilling to look at ways to change their situation, sometimes you have to create that empathic confrontation. You're being kind, you're being compassionate, but you're also confronting them about why they're stuck in a rut. So, sometimes the best way to talk about empathic confrontation is to explain what it is not. It is not a direct, harsh challenge. It is more of a gentle skill that involves listening to clients carefully and respectfully, and helping them examine themselves or their situations more fully. Empathic confrontation is not going against the client. It is going with the client, seeking clarification and the possibility of a new resolution of difficulties. Think of empathic confrontation as a supportive challenge, in the way that an instructor will oftentimes pull the answer out of you as you are struggling to get to that point. Another word for empathic confrontation is called motivational interviewing. Most clients come to an interview stuck or feeling ambivalent, having no alternative for solving a problem, or feeling torn between competing options. Some engage in internal self-blame, while others will attribute blame and responsibility to others. So either they're blaming themselves for everything, or they could potentially be blaming everyone else for something. Expressing empathy using empathic confrontation and building on the strengths and competencies of the client are more effective. Motivational interviewing's role with resistance is another way to describe empathic confrontation. In other words, what are you going to do about it? So, 5 principles of motivational interviewing. Number 1, express empathy through reflective listening. Number 2, avoid argument and direct confrontation. Number 3, develop discrepancy between clients' goals and values and their behavior. So that's a really important part, and we're going to be talking about that in a lot more detail. The inconsistency or the discrepancy between their goals and values and what they're actually doing will motivate them to change. Number 4, adjust to client resistance rather than opposing it. Resistance is a fact of life, and as such, we have to learn how to go around instead of through. And finally, support self-efficacy and optimism. Our clients often become stuck because of an internal and/or external conflict. Internal conflict or incongruity occurs when clients have difficulty making important decisions or feel confusion or sadness. They may have mixed feelings and thoughts about themselves or their identity. External conflict may be with others, friends, family, coworkers, or employers, or with a difficult situation, such as being prevented from achieving an important social or career goal. External conflict may lead to internal feelings of self-blame. Internal conflict can lead to external conflict with others. For example, the inability to make a decision may result in conflict with a significant other who needs to know what is going to happen. Some clients may be struggling to navigate their cultural or ethnic identities, a mixture of both internal and external conflict. Positive growth and development occur with the resolution of conflict and incongruity. Through this process of transformation and change, clients learn new ways to manage their lives. When we are looking at these conflicts, we have to understand that it's not always reasonable conflict, especially when it comes to this idea of self-blaming, taking the responsibility on themselves for everything that's ever happened. Because we look at things from our own perspectives, we have to also go back to that, literally first week or two of the term where we look at what some perspective is and how different perspective leads to different conclusions. So let's talk about some of these steps. The skill of confrontation is divided into 3 steps. 1. Listening and observing. 2. Providing feedback on internal and external conflict. And 3. Evaluating how the client received the confrontation and whether it led to change. The 3rd step includes the client change scale, a systematic way to determine how the client heard you. The CCS, or the client change scale, is also a way to measure how your client changes and develops over a series of sessions. Through this scale, we can examine the immediate impact of our confrontations, and we can use the same concepts over time to evaluate client success. So let's get into this in a much more deeper perspective. Empathic confrontation step 1, observing and listening. So what you're doing here is you identify conflict by listening to and observing mixed messages, discrepancies, and incongruity or inconsistency. Discrepancies between you and the client can be challenging. Many counselor-client relationships will have implicit conflict when the counselor does not agree with a client's choice or has differing values. Counseling is for the client, not you. This is a time to maintain professional behavior and accept and understand where the client is coming from. The distinction between internal and external conflict needs constant attention. All too often, external issues result in internal conflict and anxiety for the client. For example, a woman may think that her partner's abuse is her fault and may stay in a dysfunctional relationship while blaming herself for the situation, which from an outsider's perspective, of course, seems ridiculous. But on the other hand, when you are being told day after day by your partner that you're stupid and you're ugly and you can't do anything right, you begin to believe it. Now there's that little kernel of you inside of you that has, your self-esteem saying that can't possibly be right. And that's what led them to seek counseling in the first place. Discrimination in the form of racism, sexism, ableism, That's for people who are handicapped or handicapable. Ageism and other forms of oppression can result in depression and self-blame. Narrative therapy terms this internalization of the problem. In such situations, interviewers and counselors need to work toward externalization of the problem. When clients blame themselves for the difficult challenges they face, help them discover that the real location of the difficulty is not them, but it's in others. These clients often benefit from new perspective you provide through feedback and influencing skills. So again, what we have to look at here is this idea of discrimination becoming so internalized that you don't understand that this is somebody else's prejudice and it's not your problem. And when we look at how this plays out, a large part of what the counselor is doing is trying to get them, the client, to externalize and understand that the problem is not with them, but with their gender, their race, their age, any number of things. And it is, again, other people's issues, not their own. But they've internalized it to such an extent that they are challenged by this idea of being able to accept themselves as being satisfied or happy, and it's the world that has the problem. And because we are encountering the world at every point in our lives. Number 2, point out issues of incongruity, internal and external feedback, and work to resolve them. Confrontation is too often thought of as blaming a person for his or her faults. Rather, the issue is intentionally facing the incongruity and helping the client think it through. The following summarizes key dimensions of effective empathic confrontation, supporting while challenging. So we have clearly identified the incongruity or conflict in the story or comment. Then draw out specifics of the conflict or mixed messages using questions and other listening skills. And then periodically summarize each dimension of the incongruity. Many clients are unaware of their mixed messages and discrepancies. Point these out gently but firmly. Notice how they react to your challenge and assess your impact with the client change scale. And we'll look at that in more detail in a few minutes. The point here is that we are not looking to get into a fight with our client. We are looking to help them realize what they're saying and how the discrepancy causes the conflict. Number 3, evaluate change using the client change scale. The effectiveness of a confrontation is measured by how the client responds. If you observe closely in the here and now of the session, you can rate how effective your interventions have been. You will see the client change or not change language and behavior in the interview. When you see immediate or gradual changes over several sessions, you know that your intervention has been successful. When you don't see the change you anticipate or think is needed, this is the time for intentionality, flexing, and having another response skill or strategy available. If a client is just not ready to move in that direction, you have to keep trying and use a different skill set. Because the client is resistant doesn't mean that you can't help them. It's just going to take longer to help them. So here is the client change scale, and the 5 stages are changed, may move in a step-by-step order, but the arrows between all the stages show that clients often move backwards and forwards, up and down as they encounter new thoughts, feelings, and meanings. This CCS is presented here using 5 examples of reactions to divorce. Anytime clients are working through change, they talk about their issues with varying levels of awareness. The client may be in denial one moment, then talk as if he or she accepts the problem, and then return to bargaining to avoid change. So let's go over to the right to our actual examples. Level 1, denial. The individual denies or fails to hear that an incongruity or mixed message exists. So for example, I'm not angry about the divorce. These things happen. I do feel sad and hurt, but definitely not angry. Sure, we all believe that one. Level 2, partial examination. The client may work on a part of the discrepancy, but fails to consider the other dimensions of the mixed message. And again, the example would be, yes, I hurt, and perhaps I should be angry, but I can't really feel it. Level 3, acceptance and recognition, but no change. The client may engage the empathic confrontation, but makes no resolution. Until the client can examine incongruity, stuckness, and mixed messages accurately, real change in thoughts, feelings, and behavior is difficult. Coming to terms with anger or some other denied emotion is an important breakthrough and often is a sufficient source for the client. So the example here would be, I guess I do have mixed feelings about it. I certainly do feel hurt about the marriage. I realize how really angry I am. Level 4, generation of a new solution. The client moves beyond recognition of the incongruity or conflict and puts things together in a new and productive way. Needless to say, this usually does not happen immediately. It can take several interviews or sessions over a period of weeks and sometimes months. And in this we have the example, yes, I've been avoiding my anger and I think it's getting in my way. If I'm going to move on, I will accept the anger and deal with it. Level 5, transcendence. Development of new, larger, and more inclusive constructs, patterns, or behaviors. Many clients will never reach this stage. A confrontation is most successful when the client recognizes the discrepancy and generates a new thought pattern or behavior to cope with and resolve the incongruity. And the example over here on the right, you help me see that mixed feelings and thoughts are part of every relationship. I've been expecting too much. If I expressed both my hurt and my anger more effectively, perhaps I wouldn't be facing a divorce. So we use this client change scale to really identify where the client is in terms of dealing with their inconsistencies and their challenges, because we can then quantify or objectify where they need to go next. And this helps the counselor create a plan of action. While the progression from denial through acceptance through significant change can be linear and in a step-by-step order, this does not always happen. Think of a client working through the unexpected death or through the expected death of a loved one. One possibility is for the client to move through the CCS stages one at a time. But often the client may seem to be moving forward and then suddenly drop back a level or two. At one interview, the client may seem acceptant of what is to come, but in the next session move back to partial examination or even denial. Then we might see a temporary jump to transcendence, followed by a return to acceptance. The CCS provides a useful framework for accountability and measuring client growth. So, and we've talked about this before in other classes, the fact that, when we talk about the social sciences, psychology, behavioral health, sociology, these are not the hard science that you would see with biology or chemistry. If you add an extra oxygen to H2O and make it H2O2, you are going to see a significant change. You go from water to poison. However, In the social sciences, which tend to not be quite so hard and fast in their rules, you're dealing with the individual identity of a person, and that is changing radically, especially when they go through a crisis. And when I say personality, I'm not saying, the hardcore personality traits that are settled when we're children, but the issues we're dealing with in terms of how our personality allows us to manage them. Virtually any problem a client presents may be assessed at one of the 5 levels. If your client starts with you at denial or partial acceptance level 1 or 2, and then moves with your help to acceptance and generating new solutions level 3 or 4, you have clear evidence of the effectiveness of your interviewing process. The 5 levels may be seen as a general way to view the change process in the interviewing process, counseling, and therapy. Each confrontation or other interview intervention in the here and now may lead to identifiable changes in awareness. Depending on the issue, change may be slow. For some clients, movement to partial acceptance, level 2, or acceptance but no change, level 3, is a real triumph. There are a variety of issues where acceptance represents highly successful counseling and therapy. For example, the client has been in a situation where change may be impossible or really difficult. Thus, accepting the situation as it is a good result. A client facing death is perhaps the best example and does not always have to reach new solutions and transcendence. Simply accepting the situation as it may be enough. There are some things that cannot be changed and need to be lived with. Easy does it, life is not fair, there is a need to accept the inevitable. For a client whose partner or parent is an alcoholic, it is a major step to realize that the situation cannot be changed. Acceptance is the major breakthrough that will lead later to new solutions. And when we talk about alcoholism, we have to remember that the family of the alcoholic will oftentimes take on the responsibility of why their loved one drinks, when that's really not the case. It is the alcoholic's responsibility, and that really boils down to understanding personal choice and the decisions we all make. So, and of course the alcoholic is quite willing to blame others. If you hadn't got me so mad when I got home from work, or if you had done the dishes, I wouldn't need to drink. There's all these ridiculous reasons, and yet that internal conflict, the external conflict, can create these issues for people whose family members are addicts. You will find that many clients are not comfortable with coercive or aggressive confrontational and challenging approaches that are provided too quickly. We label these efforts non-empathic confrontation. They represent interviewer efforts to work on the client instead of working collaboratively with the client. At best, they represent a genuine effort to get clients to do something about their issues. At worst, they represent ill attempts towards manipulation. Either way, the interviewer's actions disrespect their client's capacity to resolve their own issues. Telling the client what the issue is and how to resolve it is not an effective method. This is particularly so with changes the client may not be ready to make. And just to kind of reflect on this for a moment, we go back to that old story of, you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. You teach the man how to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And it's the same situation in therapeutic counseling, is you teach them how to manage their own issues, their own skills. You identify their personal strengths, and that will help them through the rest of their lives. Whereas if you just say, you know what your problem is, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You've just solved that little problem for that little day. So again, a lot of this is helping people develop the skill sets they need to manage stressors in their lives. Direct instructions, persuasion, argumentation, and proselytization are other ways of describing non-emphatic confrontation, in addition to the following: a judgmental vocal tone, blaming, hostile, and pejorative statements, assuming, and pushing. All of these are big no's. You don't do it because you're going to just create more problems with your client. So let's talk about the word resistance. Think of resistance as a defense and protective mechanism for your client. Resistance often starts as an effort to keep your client safe. It is better to go with the resistance and listen emphatically. Resistance to talking about something that often relates to some issues from the immediate or distant past, or the client may simply be uncomfortable with certain topics ranging from sexuality to past errors they may have made. Respect the resistance. Listen and learn. So it is especially challenging to work with some resistant acting out children or teens, often diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, and adults who have been diagnosed as antisocial, and that's the antisocial personality disorder. Understanding others empathetically is often difficult or impossible for these individuals. Neuroscience research has shown that their brains mirror neurons essential for empathy, fire either very little or not at all. Your personal support can help clients build new behaviors, thoughts, and meanings in a way that recognizes their strengths and current readiness to change and respect their capacity for self-direction and freedom to make decisions that are meaningful to them. Moving to that multicultural perspective, confrontation of discrepancies can be highly challenging to any client, but particularly to one who is culturally different from you. The empathic confrontation process may be made acceptable if the helper takes time to establish a solid relationship of trust and rapport before engaging in confrontation. If you have a fragile client, or if the relationship is not solid, confrontation skills need to be used with sensitivity, ethics, and care. Within the wide diversity that is multiculturalism, expect a considerable amount of incongruity and conflict between the individual and the external world, as well as the internal hurt and anger, and especially the self-blame. Directly, but with as much support as possible, confront conscious and unconscious sexism, racism, heterosexism, and discrimination of all types. So, for example, if you have a young person, 19, 20 years old, who is beginning to understand that their sexual orientation is not heterosexual, but their family is very traditional and very old school, so to speak, then these folks are going to have a hard time being their authentic selves to their families because they're afraid of rejection and alienation. And as such, this person who's beginning to understand their sexual identity might blame themselves. They might see themselves as being a failure to their family. So we as therapists in a, depending on your environment, we have to work with that client to get them to understand that heterosexism, in this case, is discrimination, and it's not okay. So, for example, a woman may be depressed, but is this depression her problem, or is her sadness the result of sexual harassment on the job? A white male client who has not been promoted may be angry, believing that his being passed over for promotion may be the result of what he terms reverse discrimination. Your ability to understand and identify the many conflicts and discrepancies related to multiculturalism is essential. It is also critical that you, the interviewer, work through these issues in your own mind. Seek supervision when necessary. What you feel in your heart is available only to you. So if you have prejudicial feelings, discriminatory feelings, you need to work through those before you can help others. Because discrimination and prejudice are both negatives. They're not positives in any situation. From the developing baby to the older adult, we are all affected by acts of violence and confrontations. Babies are exposed to parental arguments, diverse individuals affronted by overt racism or subtle microaggressions, older students abused by others, and adolescents treated at boot camps are all affected. Their neuronal, emotional, behavioral, and interpersonal development suffers. Racism also acts as a chronic stressor, triggering similar physiological responses and promoting negative consequences such as job strain, interpersonal conflict, smoking, eating disorders, high blood pressure, elevated heart rate, increases in cortisol, that's our stress chemical, and suppressed immunity. How we act in a conflictive situation is affected by our brain signals. If something frightens us or we feel danger, the brain signals stress, which triggers the release of cortisol and the fight or flight response. Our body is taxed, our mind gets stuck, we develop negative emotions and narrow views, and we become aggressive or defensive. We attack or withdraw while failing to see possible solutions or seize opportunities for success. Empathic confrontations can be valuable here. It is also a matter of social justice to bring awareness to these issues, help clients name and externalize oppressive situations, promote empathic listening and positive relationships, and give peace a chance. So in a sense here, what we're trying to do is help clients understand that prejudice, discrimination, is the outlier. That this idea of being a positive person is so much more important than the color of your skin, your religion, your race, any of that. Let's talk about group conflict. Nobody can get along with everybody all the time. The more we interact with friends, family, clients, or organizations, the greater the chances we will run into potential conflict. Furthermore, we work in increasingly diverse environments with people who differ in gender, race, ethnicity, age, nationality, immigration status, and conflict resolution style. Conflict can be a creative force or a disruptive one. In spite of all this complexity, it will depend on how you manage or mediate it. So, when we're looking at empathic confrontation, we also are going to incorporate the 5-stage counseling and psychotherapy model. Empathic confrontation serves as a solid base for mediation. In conflict resolution and mediation, whether between children, adolescents, or adults, the micro skills and the 5-stage counseling and psychotherapy model provide a useful framework. Number 1, empathic relationship. Develop rapport and outline the structure of your session. Number 2, story and strengths. Define the problem or the concern. Number 3, use the basic listening sequence to draw out wants and desires for satisfactory resolution. Number 4, re-story. Begin negotiation in earnest. And then action. Contract and generalize. Summarize the agreed upon solution or parts of the solution if negotiations are still in progress. And we went over this in a previous chapter, so theoretically it should not be brand new right now. Skills for communicating with members of different cultural groups are essential. The respectful model, and again we discussed this in a previous chapter, will help achieve this goal. Participants have different histories and beliefs leading to varying levels of comfort. Some will bring stories of social trauma, discrimination, and victimization. During mediation, some will present with persistent silence or strong suspicion. The following model, provided by the King Center, will help you enter the world of others who differ from you and reach consensus on a nonviolent and respectful solution. And just to review the respectful model, we have an understanding of religion, spirituality, economic and class background, sexual identity, personal style, ethnic and racial identity, chronological or lifespan challenges, trauma, family background, unique physical characteristics, and the location of residence and their language. So when we look at the respectful model, what we're looking at is no matter what culture we're working with, there are models that will help us be more successful. So, the King Center model for conflict resolution. Number 1, personal commitment. Embrace yourself as a cultural being. Number 2, information gathering and education. Observe participant style and expectations. Draw out the differing stories while continuing to search for underlying issues and observing emotional reactions. Number 3, negotiation. Goals and new solutions. Conflict is opportunity. Accepting conflict as part of life creates an opportunity for resolution and progress. The question is not if conflict will occur, but rather what are you going to do when it happens? Because remember, conflict is inevitable. Define and redefine goals. Conflict is not usually resolved all at once, and work on parts of the larger concerns. Direct action. Number 4. Will the conflicting parties agree to take the negotiation process into the real world and implement change? Number 5. Reconciliation. Apply the platinum rule. The golden rule suggests treating people the way we would like to be treated. The platinum rule, on the other hand, suggests treating others in a way they would like to be treated. Understanding how another person would like to be treated represents an advanced level of multicultural understanding. Mediating to achieve a consensus or compromise among arguments or disagreements represents advanced mastery of multicultural competence. And again, just remember that in the United States we have a very multicultural population, especially on the East and West coasts. So as a consequence, it's almost inevitable that you'll run into a variety of multicultural individuals. And understanding the respectful model and understanding the model for conflict resolution, combining those will really help the client understand their internal and external conflicts. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, please email or text your instructor. If you are not in our class but would still like to ask a question, leave a comment and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you and have a fabulous day.